Hilchish Gogis Perek Shleisha Aser. In Perek Yud Beis, we were learning the dinim of a par helam dover shel tzibur and al derazed zesor avid zara. This is normally there's mem gimel avedas which are chayiv krisus, which the Ram mentioned in Perek Aleph, which you're chayiv on that if you do b'shegig gachatas kvuah. And that din is whether a yochid did it or even a tzibur did it. If every person that does it b'shegig, any of these avedas, is chayiv gachatas kvuah. Now we learn a special din that if Bezdin paskin, Bezdin by mistake paskin, that these averas are certain averas mutter, and as a result of that, the Reiv Atzibur or Reiv Shifti Atzibur went ahead and did this avera. So rather than each yochid bringing a chatas kvuah, Bezdin brings a carbon for everybody. And if it's Avodah Zarah, so they bring the Seir Avodah Zarah, so they bring a par le'ela and a sor lechatos. And if it's the other Aveda, so then they bring a par lechatos, and that's called the par elam davar shel tzibur. And these behemoths are brought, these karbanos are brought for each shevet. So in other words, you bring 12 parim of oila and 12 seirim for chatos if it's talking about Avodah Zarah, and you bring 12 par elam davar shel tzibur if we're talking about the other Avedas. That was the din. Now at the end of Perek Yud Beis, the Rambam Rechem do is kama pratim that only then would the bezin be mechuyev, and everyone else would be potter. So some of the pratim was that it has to be dafke the bezna godel, the bezna godel, and it also has to be the Rosh Hashiva imoim. That says the head of the bezna godel has to be together with the bezna godel, and that the bezna godel has to be all of them roy le'iro, and kama other pratim which the Rambam is going to explain in these prakim Yud Gimel and Yud Dalet. Halacha Perek Yud Gimel. Ketzad im choser achas mikol hadrachim shebiyarnu yipotru bezin v'yischayv oisman. If all the pratim were there, so then bezin is mechuyev and the oisman are potter. Masha'enkin, if one of these pratim that he mentioned was missing, so then the din is going to be that each yachid brings his own carbon and bezin is potter. Harei shehoiru bezin shalechad min hashvatim lehem shechelev akeva mutter. The din is only that Bezna Godel, the Bezna of Ayin Aleph. The Bezna Godel, if they paskind, so then the din is that the Bezna brings and everyone else is potter. What happens if it wasn't the Bezna Godel, it was a Bezna Shalechem and Ashvatim, the Bezna which is a Bezna of Chov Gimel, Shechelev Akeva Mutter, and Lepeil Vachlu Anshi Mekemam Alpiyam, so Lechura, they're also like they're Seimachan Bezna, but nevertheless, Oisi Bezna Pturim, because this din of a Par Helms Dovishal Tzibur is a din Dafkan Bezna Godel, and b'chol misha achal maybe chatas kvuah al Shegagaos. That's b'chlal the rule. If Bezdin is potter, everyone else is chayiv. Because the reason why they're potter is not because they're potter because they were listening to Bezdin. They're potter because lepel Bezdin is being chayiv for what they did. Memela the Bezdin is kilo bringing a carbon on their behalf. Masha'inkin over here, since the Bezdin is not mechuyev, because we're not talking about the Bezdin of Ayin Aleph, so memela, so there's no one bringing a carbon, so they're shegigim, even though they listen to Bezdin, but still they're called shegigim, and therefore each one has to bring a chatas kvuah al Shegagaos. V'chein, so the first case was that it wasn't Bezna Godel. V'chein, im heiru Bezna Godel, shedam halev mutter. The Bezna Godel paskin that the dam halev is mutter. In other words, the dam hashchita is osir, but the dam halev is mutter. And lepel v'lihoye Rosh Hashiva imoim. The Reish Sanhedrin wasn't there with them. That's a second case. Or a third case is shehoye echad mem ein roya liyas memunim Sanhedrin. You have a Bezna of Ayin Aleph, and together with the Rosh Yeshiva, but on the other end, one of the people in the Sanhedrin right now is a person that's really not royal liyas memunim Sanhedrin. Kigen shoye ger, a mamzer, a zokin, a shalira bonim ukeitzmem, which these people really, it shouldn't be a ger, it has to be only a dafka, someone that's Yisrael, and it can't be a mamzer, someone that can't be masi, but knows it doesn't has a psul in yichos, it can't be masi biti lekuna. A zokin, a shalira, because of achzarius, memela, he can't be a chelik of the Sanhedrin. Ukeitzmem. And lepel, one of these cases, we have three cases. We have a case that wasn't Sanhedrin Agadol. We have a case that it was Sanhedrin Agadol, but it wasn't with the Rosh Hashiva Imoim. A third case was that it was the Sanhedrin Agadol with the Rosh Hashiva, but one of the Sanhedrin wasn't royal to be in Sanhedrin. And lepel, v'asu ha'am al piyam, v'achlu dam halev. So in this case, Hari Bezin Turim. So Bezin is potter, because it's missing one of the details. And v'chol misha achal maybe chatas kvuin al Shegagaos. And anyone else that ate, on the people that ate, even though they were relying on Bezin, But since we're not dealing with Bezna Gadol, and it wasn't the, or if there was a Bezna Gadol, it wasn't Rosh Hashiva Imoim, or even if it was Rosh Hashiva Imoim and Bezna Gadol, but one of them wasn't Royal Sanhedrin, so Mela, they're Potter and everyone else is Chayv. Minayin Shein HaKosov Medaber El Bezna Gadol. Who says that the pasuk is talking about Bezna Gadol? Shnamar Beim Kol Adas Yisrael Yishgu. So Adas Yisrael is referring to Bezdin, and Kol Adas Yisrael means the Bezdin which is Memunah on Kol Yisrael. And then Uminayin Achiyu Kulam Ruyim Lehiro, and you have to add also that and Yer Rosh Hashiva Imoim. This says this goes together. Uminayin Achiyu Kulam Lehiro and V'Shir Rosh Hashiva Imoim. So we learn out Shenameh V'Meinu Eida. So from Meinu Eida we learn out that Shiyah Lehem Kinayim was talking about someone that's Lehem Kinayim, which is the Rosh Hashiva, someone that's the head of the Sanhedrin. And then there's another pasuk, Olahalu Noemer V'Shavtu Eida, and over there it's talking about Din Nefashos. Is Ma Ha'Eida Amar Din Nefashos. It has to be Kulam Ruya Lehiro, which we learn out from Sukkim, that if you have a bezdin and not Kulam Ruya Lehiro, so you don't kill someone based on their psak din, even though there was Chav Gimel and a bezdin of Chav Gimel and Rave Paskin that he was Chayiv Misa, so L'chura he wasn't a Geah, but L'peil he has to be part of this. The Sanhedrin has to be comprised of people. This is the bezdin of Din and Nefashos has to be comprised only of people which are Royal Leiro, which we learn out from Sukkim. So B'kitzur, there's two dinim. One din is that it has to be Me'eni Ho'edat Shiyalem Kinayim. So from there we learn out that it has to be a Sheshivim. And we learn out also, since it says Eida, we learn out it has to be Kulam Ruyin Le'ira, because it's similar to V'Shaftu Eida, which is talking about Din and Nefashos. Is Af Eidu HaMura B'Shkagazu Achiyah Kulam Ruyin Le'ira. So these are the first dinim, which is that the bezdin has to be a bezdin of the bezdin of Ainal, bezdin Agadol. It has to be the Rosh Hashiva Imohem, and it has to be that Kulam Ruyin Lehiro. And if they're missing one of these pratim, so this din of a Parhel Nevishal Tzibur or the Sir Avidazor is not Chal, and each person, even though they paskind, Abu Lepel, and each people did Al Piyam, and Brevak Tzibur did Al Piyam, but nevertheless each person brings his own Chatas Kvor. That's din number one, which includes the three pratim. V'chein, im hoiru, and v'yoda echad v'amshato. There was one person amongst the bezdin that knew that bezdin was making a mistake, and v'amalem, and he tained to them toyamatim. He said to them, "You're making a mistake." And lepel v'rabba olav amatirim. There was the rave against him, and lepel v'itiru, but he tained that they're making a mistake. So the din is also in such a case, ari bezdin pturim, v'chol misha asa al piyam chayiv lahavi chatas kval Shegagaos. In such a case where there was someone that stood up against Bezdin, and he told clearly to Bezdin that Atim Toyim, so B'chiyai Gavna, the din is that Bezdin is not Mechuyev, and the Yechidim are Mechuyev, Shnamar, V'im Kol Adas Yisrael Yishgu. So we learn out, Achi Yishgu Kol HaSanhedrin. There has to be Yishgu Kol HaSanhedrin. Masha'enkin, if part of the Sanhedrin tained against it, they clearly tained against it, so then it's not Yishgu Kol Adas Yisrael, and therefore this whole din doesn't apply. The din of Parhel and Davishal Tzibur doesn't apply. Yoda Echad Min HaSanhedrin Miyutim Sheto HaMatirin and V'Shosku. They didn't argue back. And it was the case before was talking about they argued back and they said that Teyamatim. Over here we're talking about they didn't argue back. They knew that they're making a mistake, but they didn't argue back. Is a Hail V'Heru V'Lihoyisham Chelik U'Poshta Hira B'Reva Kol. There was Bezdin Paskin, and there was no one arguing with them. No one was telling that they're making a mistake. And Lepel was Poshta Hira B'Reva Kol, is that a Bezdin Chayav B'Karbon. So Bezdin is Chayav B'Karbon, and V'Chol Sh'asal Piyam Potter is Nachamal. Bezdin Paskins, if there was someone that was tiny to them, Teyamatim, so even though it was Rabu Hamatirim Ala Isrim, nevertheless, the people that do it are Mechuyev to bring a carbon, and Bezdin Potter. Masha'enkin, if there was no one stood up against the Bezdin to argue against them, so then, even though Lepel Amiyut didn't hold of what the Bezdin was saying, but nevertheless, and Lepel Reva Kol did Al Piyam. So if Reva Kol did Al Piyam, so the din is that they're Chayiv, that Bezdin is Chayiv, and the Reva Kol is Potter. Is again Hari Bezdin Chayav B'Karbon the Chol Shas Al Piyam Potter. Now the Elu Sheshasku. Now the people of the Sanhedrin that were part of the Sanhedrin, and they knew that Sanhedrin were making a mistake, and Lepel they were Shasku, and they didn't argue against the Sanhedrin. Is im also al pi elu sheheru. If they did al pi elu, if they went ahead and also listened to the heter of the Shara Sanhedrin, even though they made a mistake, is harei l'chayav. Why? They weren't really Taylor Bebezin because they knew that Bezin was making a mistake. And since they knew Bezin was making a mistake, and nevertheless they did it, as we'll learn Behemshech, they did it because they thought that even though they know Bezin is making a mistake, still they're supposed to do it. So Memela, that's considered a different mistake. It's not a mistake. Because when you make a mistake because you think it's taka mutter, because Bezin said it's mutter, so that's one mistake. But over here, they know it's usher. However, they're making a mistake in thinking that you're supposed to listen to Bezin, even though Bezin made a mistake. So that's a different type of mistake, and that's not part of the mistake which Bezin brings a carbon for in their potter. Is nachamol. If they went ahead, they knew that they made a mistake, and they did it anyways. Al pi elo sheheru, harelu chayavim tin tshili tolu bebezin. V'chein im nosnu v'nosnu bedover v'amru. Another case where Bezin is not chayiv and kol yochid is chayiv. Nosu v'nosnu bedover v'amru. Dover zeh mutteru. They were discussing amongst themselves, not b'negei lepel. Wasn't halacha l'maisi. They were saying dover zeh mutteru. They weren't telling anyone that you're allowed to do it. And and they were discussing amongst themselves, and that was not halacha l'maisa, halacha in Inyan, whether it's mutter or aser. And someone heard them saying it's mutter. So the din is arei kol ha'isa chayev chatas kvuah. Whoever does it based on the fact that it was heard that they said mutter, but they never said mutarim atam lases. So he's chayev chatas. Shareli heidelem befeidish lases. That's another case. V'chein im heiru v'asu miyata kol al piyam. V'nei da hashgaga. It wasn't the reva kol, but it was rather the miyata kol. And then v'nei da hashgaga. And then they found out that they made a mistake in the hero. So again, it's Ari Bezim Turim, and the Elu Hamiyat Sha'asu Chayav. Cholachat v'yachad, maybe Chatosi, and each one has to bring his Chatos. So it's Nachamol B'kitzer. It has to be Bezin HaGodel, it has to be Rosh Hashiva Imoim, then it has to be that their Kulam is ruining Lehiro, that's number one. Then there has to be that there wasn't somebody that was tiny to them Teyamatim. That's another. There can't be someone that's tiny to them Teyamatim. It has to be that nobody, even if someone was arguing, didn't hold that way, but he didn't tie it to them teyamatim. Then we're learning another din, that it has to be that they said beferish mutarim atam lasis. In other words, it was halacha lemaisa. It wasn't halacha nin, it was mutarim atam lasis. And then at the end, we're saying it has to be that reivat tzibur also al piyam. Reivat tzibur also al piyam. The value we also learned that the person that was part of the Sanhedrin, that knew that the Sanhedrin was making a mistake, and reivat tzibur did al piyam, and as a result of that, the Sanhedrin was bringing a carbon. And he also did, so Lepel, since he knew that Sanhedrin was making a mistake, so therefore he has to bring his own carbon. He's not nischaper with the carbon of the Sanhedrin. Halacha base. Now, Sanhedrin atzma she'asu beirasim. What about the Sanhedrin that paskind? And they also did what they paskind is mutter. So the din is eina mitztar from the Reiv HaKol. We have to see whether the Reiv HaKol did al piyam. So the fact that Sanhedrin did it, they're not part of the numbers. Ad sheyu harev she'asu chutz min haSanhedrin. In order to say that reivat tzibur did al piyam, it means reivat tzibur chutz min haSanhedrin. That's the number one. So there has to be reivat tzibur, and we're saying the reivat tzibur doesn't include the Sanhedrin. If the Sanhedrin are the people that are being mashlim reivat tzibur, it's not considered reivat tzibur. Now we're learning the din and the pratim of what's called reivat tzibur. Also reiv anshe Eretz Yisrael al piyam. If most of the people living there Yisrael did al piyam, aval pi she'elu ha'osim were only shevet echad. That's one scenario. V'chein im asu reva shvatim. If reva shvatim did it, aval pi she'miut hakol. Even though they're not really reva kol, they're only miut hakol. So either way, say if it's reva tzibur, if it's shevet echad, or it's reva shvatim, even though they're not reva kol. So either way, that's called a rave. Like we said before, that if the rave did it, that's when the bezin is chayiv. And then Bezin Chayav Veisim Turim Ketzad. Hoyu Yeshvi Eretz Yisrael Sheish Mi'is Elev Echad. There was 600,001 people living in Eretz Yisrael. V'hoyu Ha'esim Beiraz Bezin Shleish Mi'is Elev Echad. And 300,000 plus one did the Hirav Bezin. V'harikulan B'nei Yehuda Bilvad. And Lepel, all these 300,001 are all from one Shevet Yehuda. That's one scenario. Oi, another scenario. There was 600,001 people in Eretz Yisrael, and Shehayu Eisim B'nei Shiva Shvatim Kulam, that they were the people of the seven Shvatim, seven entire Shvatim. Lashon Haram is 7 entire Shvatim. did the avera. I'll pay the best. Nachmal Eishayu Eisen b'nei Shiva Shvatim Kulam. 7 entire Shvatim did the avera. I'll pay bezin. There's afal pi sheyesh ben mea elef. There's only 100,000. So there's certainly not rave. There's 600,001 people, and here only 100,000 people. But the 100,000 people are 7 complete Shvatim. So the then is in both cases sai of 300,001 from Shevet Yehuda, or 100,000 from the 7 Shvatim, which all 7 Shvatim is Ari Bezin Chayavin v'Choleisen Al Piyam Pturim. And then he says Ve'ein Mashgichen Al Yeshu Chutzlars. The count is only Eretz Yisrael. She'ein Kori Kol Elu B'nei Eretz Yisrael. Who's considered the Kol? The Kahal Adas Yisrael. The Kol ain't Kol Elu B'Eretz Yisrael. So the people that are in Eretz Yisrael are part of the Kol. The people that are in Chutzlars are Yidden, but they're not part of the Kol. And therefore they don't count whether it's Reva Kol or not Reva Kol. That's the number one. And then the Rambam adds another one, V'shevet Menashe v'Ephraim, Einem Cheshuvim Kishnei Shvatim L'Inyan Zeh. So even though they were Mekabel, 2 separate Chalakim in Eretz Yisrael, when they made the Gedel, Rach Begedel Tichol Ka'aretz, over there was a separate Gedel for Menashe and Ephraim. They got 2 separate Chalakim. But nevertheless, as far as this din of a Par Helm Davar Shel Tzibur, which is only done when it's Reiv HaShvatim, so the Ephraim and Menashe are considered one Shevet. Elishneim Shevet Echad. So B'kitzur, we're learning over here that there has to be Reiv HaKol, and one din is that the Sanhedrin is not mitzvah to Reiv HaKol, and then there's another din that it has to be Dafka, the people in Eretz Yisrael, and the Reiv HaKol can be all of one Shevet, even though, as long as it's Reiv people of the Kol, and it could be the 7 Shvatim, even though they're not Reiv HaKol. Now the Rambam writes that Shoyu Eisim B'nei Shiva Shvatim Kulam. But it's brought down based on the Gemara in Herius that it doesn't mamish have to be Shvatim Kulam. In other words, as the Reiv of 7 Shvatim. It doesn't. It says Nea Shvatim Kulam, but they bring down based on the Gemara in Herius that it only has to be the Reiv HaShvatim Kulam. In other words, you have the Reiv of 7 Shvatim, even though they're not Reiv of Klal Yisrael, nevertheless, that's considered already enough. That's considered the Reiv HaTzibur Asu Al Piyam. Now, Halacha Gimel. Hayu ha'osim merubim b'shas achet, umuatim b'shas yediyah. So as you can have them see is when they did the Aveira, so most of the people did the Aveira. It was the Reiv Klal Yisrael that did the Aveira. But Lepel, some of those people died. So now when there's coming Yediyah, so we're thinking about now, how many people would have to bring a Chatas now? Right now, the people that would have to bring a Chatas now would be Miyat HaKol, not Reiv HaKol. Because if you have 300,000 people, let's say in the case where the Rambam said, you have 300,001 people that did the Aveira. So they were the Reiv HaKol. But Lepel, some of those people died. So now when the Bezin realizes that they did the Aveira and that they passed him not right, and people did the Aveira, so the people that did the Aveira that are around today are the Miyot. The people when they did the Aveira were Reiv. That would be one case. Or the other case, Muatim b'shas achet, while they were doing the Aveira, they were Muatim. Aber Merubim b'shas yediyah, Lepel b'shas yediyah, they're the Merubim. Because the people that didn't do the Aveira are people that died. So now the people that did the Aveira are Merubim. So the din is Hakil Heilech Achashas HaMaisa. It depends on b'shas HaMaisa. The Iker is whether b'shas HaMaisa they were Reiv and not b'shas HaMaisa they were Reiv. So in the case of the 300,001, if the 300,001 did it, so even if some of them died, so Lepel, they're considered that Reiv HaTzibur Asal Piyam. If let's say only 300,000, or less than 300,000 did it, so they weren't the Reiv. But now some of the people that didn't do it died. So now the people that are the issue are people that are Reiv HaTzibur. Reiv HaTzibur is the issue whether they're chayiv a carbon or not. So that's not the issue whether Reiv HaTzibur is chayiv a carbon. The issue was Reiv HaTzibur the people that did it. Yeah. Halacha Dalet. Hoyru bezn bechelev min achalov mishum mutter, and lepel v'ochal miot hakol al piyam, v'neidel lehem shechatu, and then v'chozru b'hem. So we have a case where it was only miot hakol, so the pastors each one of the miot hakol is mechuy v'chatas. Now v'achar kacheru shavidazora plainis muteres, and then again v'avid eisa avidazora miot achar al piyam. A different miot ate al piyam b'negei avidazora. So the two piski didim. One din b'negei chelev, one b'negei avodah zarah, and by each psak din there was only a miut hakol. But now kshitztarfu ha'echlim leivdim is a reif. So if you combine these two miutim, there'll be a reif. So the Ram Paskins Harel Mitzdarf from them Mitzdarf. Aval Pisha Hoisulem Yedir B'Tayim. It's considered one, and therefore, now the Pashas Advarim. Therefore, the Pasha would be that Bezdin brings, and everyone else doesn't bring. That's L'chura, the Pashas Advarim, that Bezdin brings and everyone else doesn't bring. Now the Ravid asks over here, L'chura, there's a Bamisatz in Yeboyin Gemara, because the Shaila is, for Avodah Zarah, Bezdin brings a par L'oila and a Sor L'chatos. For Chaylev, they bring a par L'chatos. So L'chura over here, a Miyot did Avodah Zarah, a Miyot did Chaylev. So how could you be Mitzdaref? What kind of tziruf are you going to have? So it's a Shaila in the Gemara. So since it's a Shaila in the Gemara, so how could the Ram Paskin that Bezdin brings? L'chura, it's a Shaila in the Gemara. So the Mefarshim explain that according to the Raiva, the Shaila in Gemara is whether Bezdin brings. According to the Rambam, there's no suffix if Bezdin brings. Bezdin Avada doesn't bring. Because since Bezdin knows, for Avodah Zarah, they bring one chatos, and for Chaylev, they bring a different chatos, and since they didn't do a rave of either, not a rave for Avodah, there wasn't rave did Avodah Zarah, not a rave did Chaylev, so obviously Bezdin doesn't bring. The Shaila is, since Lepel, as a result of what they did, what they said, Sai by Chatas, Sai by Chaylev, the Rav Hatzibur brought it, so the Shaila is whether the Tzibur has to bring. So that's a chiluk between the Ravid and the Rambam, how to learn Pshat and the Shaila in the Gemara. According to the Ravid, the Shaila in the Gemara is going to get Bezdin, if Bezdin brings. Mele, and the Ravid is understanding that the Rambam is passing that Bezdin brings, which is the Pashtus Halosh, not real Mustafan. He doesn't really tie choice. Mashenkin and Mefarshim explain, no, that according to the Rambam, Bezdin certainly doesn't bring. But the question is, are they niftar? Because Sof Kol Sof Bezdin paskind, and Lepel they did al PM, and it was a rave. So even though Bezdin is not bringing, but nevertheless they become niftar. Now the Maisa is a big chiddush, because until now we're learning that you only niftar if Bezdin brings. But Lepel, since Bezdin doesn't bring, because Lepel they're not bringing because it was miyot Avodah Zarah and miyot Chaylev, so L'chura, how could the tzibur become potter? L'chura, until now we're learning that the tour of the tzibur could only be if there's a chiyuv on the Bezdin. So that's a shverikat over here. You have to understand pshat that be'etzem there is a chiyuv on the Bezdin. Be'etzem there is a chiyuv on the Bezdin. So the Bezdin can't bring it because it's half Avodah Zarah and half Chaylev. Al kol panim, it has to be explained. The Havonas Hadvarim, why over here it's mitzdaref legabi that the Bezdin is kilu mechuyev, and therefore the tzibur will be potter. Al kol panim it's takei boidel if shetein gemara, and as a result of that, the Rambam says Ariel mitzdarfen. So Ariel mitzdarfen is not that the Bezdin should bring, but rather that the tzibur shouldn't bring. That's how the Mefarshim explain. Nachamal. Let's read Nachamal. Heiru Bezdin b'chelev b'nachalav mishumuter, and then v'achal miyot hakol al piyam and v'nedel em shechotru v'chozru b'em and v'achar kach heiru shavidah zorah pleinis mutaras and v'avadei shavidah zorah miyot achar al piyam, and then kshitzarfu eichem le'evdim is year rave, so the din is Ariel mistarfim. V'afal pisha oislem yidir b'ntayim, to the Bezdin there was a yidir b'ntayim. But medvar mamurim, that there's such a din that they're mitzdaref, and therefore the way we're learning pshat is that the kol won't bring kshahoya hameira Bezdin echad. If there was the same Bezdin that first paskim in the Avodah Zarah, then paskim in the Ger Chaylev. Aval a mez Bezdin sheira tchila. If it was one Bezdin that was Hayrib in the Ger one din, and then v'amad acher, and then there was another Bezdin v'Hayru, so then elu mitzdarfu le'elu, so then it's not considered that there was a rave that did al PM, and since there was no rave that did al PM, so therefore each yachid has to bring himself. And afilo Hayru, this we're talking about b'negeya Chaylev and Avodah Zarah. On that the Rambam continues. Afilo Hayru shnei bati halacha hey. Afilo Hayru shnei bati adinim b'dover echad. Ken Chaylev v'Chaylev edam v'dam. So also then I'm mitzdaref. In other words, b'kitzer. We're learning over here at din. We're learning the hilchis of Reivat Tzibur. It has to be Reivat Tzibur. Has to be Reivat Tzibur in Eretz Yisrael. That's number one. Or it could be Reiv Shvatim in Eretz Yisrael. That's number one. Then it has to be that the Reivat Tzibur was b'shas hachet. And now we're learning that two chatoim, a miut, if there was two erois of Bezdin, one b'negei Chaylev and one b'negei Avodah Zarah, and there was a miut that was did the Chaylev, a miut that did the Avodah Zarah, and together they're a rave, so then it's tarif, a kol pan we're learning that the kol doesn't have to bring. But medvar mamurim, if it was one Bezdin, mashenkin, if it was two bati dinim, even if it was Chaylev and Chaylev, so then each one has to bring. That's this din. Now we're learning a new din. That even though there could be a mitzvah that the Rav did, but they didn't do it al pi the hira of Bezdin. V'chein, im lo yehoisen shegigin al pi hira. If the people that did it didn't do it because of the hira. So again, Hari Bezdin Pturim, Bezdin would be Potter, and B'chol ha'esim, and the people that did it are chayav. So when are the oisim Pturim, and the Bezdin are chayav, is when the oisim did it al pi hira. Masha'enkin, if the oisim didn't do it al pi hira, they did it al pi a different reason. So even though there was a hira and lepel, there was a rave that did it, but since the rave didn't do it al pi hira, so mele Hari Bezdin Pturim. So then Hari Bezdin Pturim v'chol ha'esim chayav. Ketzad Hayru Bezdin lechel chelev akeva kulei. Now part of the chelev akeva is considered chelev, which is osur. They went ahead and they said you're allowed to eat all of the chelev akeva. And v'yoda echad min hakol shetol, and really v'shechelev akeva osur, that the certain chelev akeva which is osur, and lepeil v'ochlei mipnei arasim. What does it mean mipnei arasim? He knew that they were making a mistake. Sho yo'oil al daitoi shemitzvah lishmei mi Bezdin aval pi shein teim. So the din is harei ha'echel chayav chatas kvuah lachilosei. He is chayav chatas kvuah lachilosei. Ve'enim mitztarev l'minyan ha'shegim al piyam. There's two dinim aces. First of all, even if there is a rave, so then he's not potter because of the carbon that Bezdin will bring, because he wasn't toiler bebezdin. Whereas toiler bebezdin means he thinks that Bezdin is saying the truth, and Memela he's listening to Bezdin. Mashengen, he knows Bezdin is making a mistake. Elamai, he made a new mistake. His mistake was that he's supposed to listen to Bezdin even if Bezdin made a mistake. So that's not the mistake. That's not the mistake that's considered that he's being toiler bebezdin, and therefore, so even though they're bringing a carbon because of the tzibur, which is also al piyam, but he has to bring his own carbon. That's din number one. There's another din that when he does it in such a manner, so he's not mitzvah to make a minyan of a tzibur. There's the din is that when the tzibur also al piyam, so the tzibur is potter and the bezdin is chayiv. But if let's say his one is negay, like in the case of the 300,001, he's the one that's going to make it that it should be that the reiv atzibur also al piyam. So since he's not doing really al piyam, so therefore he's not mitzvah to make it a reiv. Nachamol. So the din is harezo eichel chayiv chatus kvuah lachilas. So that's din number one. And also ve'ena mitzvah l'minyan hashegim al piyam. He's also not mitzvah l'minyan hashegim to make it into a reiv. Now, b'medvar mamurim, this din that if he did it based on the fact that he thought you're supposed to listen, and he knows that it's not right, so he's not considered a shaking al piyam. He was a person that was a chacham, or he was a talmud shehigil lira. So when he knows something, it's considered a yediyah. He's also a talmud shehigil lira, and he knows that they're making a mistake. And he was relying on his yediyah. And in his mind, he thinks that the Bezdin is making a mistake. So, and then he went ahead and did it because he thinks he's supposed to listen to Bezdin. So the din is Ariza Potter, because what he knows, what he says he knows that they're making a mistake is not really considered a yediyah. So therefore he's taka supposed to rely on them. Because Lepel, what he knows is not really a knowledge. So he's taka supposed to rely on them. That's not called a yediyah vadois. So mitzvah chala shaking al piyam. Even though really in his mind he thinks he does know vaistos. We're talking about a person, if he knows that he doesn't know, so there's nothing to talk about. Over here, he thinks he knows. And in reality, he's not a Talmud Shegir Le'ira. He's nevertheless, and he thinks he knows, and he thinks that nevertheless he's supposed to listen to them because they're Bezdin HaGodel. So the answer is he's taka supposed to listen to them. He's taka supposed to listen to them. And in the case before, he wasn't supposed to listen to them. Mashengan over here was supposed to listen to them. And Mele, if he listens to them, so in Mele, so he's being Taylor Berosim. V'chein, im le'yoda shato. He taka didn't know shato. He was only the person that they were saying the truth. And Lepel, they were saying right. And Lepel, v'nischav alechel shuman, it should say not v'chelev, v'nischav alechel shuman. And Lepel, v'achal chelev akeva shitiru, Lepel, he ended up eating the chelev. Aber v'hu le'yoda shu chelev keva. He thought it was shuman. He didn't realize that this was the chelev keva. He's also chayev. Why? Mipnei shachilosei, mipnei shegagosei, le mipnei ha'ira. Again, because his shegig wasn't based on their hira. The din is azoi, when they made a hira, and then people go ahead based on their hira, and they ate it, and there was a reivat tzibur of those people that ate it based on their hira. So all of these people are potter from a chatas, and the bezdin is chayav on the chatas. and they're mitzaref to the rave. Mashenkin over here, even though there was a rave that did al pi Eira, but he didn't do it because of the Eira. He did it because he thought it was shuman. So the then is Ariza Chaim, the Shachilasim, the Shegagaos, the Eira. And this tour is only to those people that are Taylor Beira, and also Veinim mitzaref l'minyan hashekin malpiyam. It's not mitzaref l'minyan hashekin. We want to know if there was a rave shegig. Rave hashegig means that they were all shegig in the same minyan. They were shegig that they were relying on Bezna Godel. Shnema l'chol lom b'shgaga sha'at shetir shgaga achas lakil. It was one shgaga. What was the shgaga? The shgaga was that they were Taylor b'Bezna. V'chein, a third case. We have a case, we had one case before where a person knows they're making a mistake. He knows they're making a mistake. And he's a Talmud Shehigil Lehira. And Mepel, he thinks that you're supposed to listen to them even though they made a mistake. That was one case where he has to bring his own karma. Then we have another case where he doesn't know that they made a mistake. He knows if, and that case, that din is only by a Talmud Shehigil Lehira. Then we have a case where a person doesn't know they made a mistake. But on the other hand, he doesn't know he's eating a keva. He thought he's eating shuman. So again, he wasn't Taylor Beirasa. So again, he has to bring his own chatas. V'chein, you have a third case. V'chein im tola ba'atzma. V'achal chela v'keva, sheheru latire, le mipnei hirason, el mipnei shub mutar b'daita. He knows, he heard their psagdin, so he's not doing it because he's relying on them. He's doing it because he's relying on himself. Because he, in his mind, he thinks it's also mutar. Is hareza chayiv chatas k'vua b'fnei atzmei. So over here he's chayiv a chatas k'vua. Why? Because lepel he's not being tailed in them. So these are three cases where he's not being tailed in them. Either he thinks they made a mistake, and he's not being tailed in them because his mistake is not that it's mutter, but his mistake is that he thinks he's supposed to listen to them, even though they made a mistake. A second case is that he doesn't know they made a mistake, but on the other hand, he did it because he didn't realize it was chaylev. He thought it was shuman. And the third case was that he knows that they gave out the hira, but he feels the same way. He feels the same din. So he's not really relying on their hira, he's relying on his own hira. So since he's relying on his own hira, and that's a mistake, so therefore he has to bring a chatas k'vua. Now this also the Mefarshim say that is only in a case where he's a Talmud Shegiel Hira, because a Talmud Shegiel Hira, to say that he's relying on his own hira is not the say that he's relying on his own hira. I mean, it's not clear. The Rambam doesn't say that. But that's how some Mefarshim want to say that this did is only in a case where he's a Talmud Shehigil Eira. Now, Zaklal, Kol HaTeilim BeBezin Potter. And also, V'ushi Yeshem Kol HaDrachim Shemiminu, Maninu, V'chol HaChai B'fnei Atzmei, Einem Mitztaref Leiv HaShegigim, and because he's Mitzchai B'atzmei because it was his own Shegig, and therefore he's not part of the Reiv Shegigim. So that's this din. So we're learning the dinim of the Reiv, that it has to be someone that's tailored but as bezin. That's only then that's a reif. Halacha Vav. Hayru bezin lahater davar. Now, before we learn halacha Vav, there's a big shaila over here, Benegeya halacha Hey, where it comes out that there's a person that's a yigil hira, bezin paskin that something is mutter, and he in his mind holds that it's usher, and he says he knows that bezin is making a mistake. And then there's a din that if he goes ahead and makes a mistake, and he goes ahead and he eats it based on the fact that you're supposed to rely on them, so that's called a mistake, and therefore it's his own mistake, and it's not a mistake really, which enables him that his chatas should be through them. He has to bring his own chatas. But the mashmois advarim obviously is that he wasn't really supposed to. He wasn't really supposed to do it al pi his own understanding, even though Bezin passed. I'm sorry. The heroic, the mashmois advarim is that really he wasn't supposed to be matured. Bezin was matter something, and he knows that Bezin made a mistake, and be'emes he's not supposed to listen to Bezin, but he made a mistake, and his mistake was that he's supposed to listen to Bezin even though he knows they made a mistake. So then he has to bring his own chatas. But the pashtus advarim is that since he knows that they made a mistake, he's not supposed to listen to them, and therefore the fact that he listened to them is his own mistake. But l'chura, that's the din of a zaken mamri. A zaken mamri means bezin paskin, and he's arguing with them. So l'chura, when bezin paskins, l'chura, he's supposed to listen to them, even if you disagree with them. So why over here we're saying that the fact that he thought that he's supposed to listen to them, even though he in his mind he knows that he made a mistake, is that's a mistake, and therefore he has to bring a chatzah. It's not a mistake because l'chura he's not supposed to listen to them. He's supposed to rely on what they're saying. And then he would taka be a tailor bebezdin also, because he's supposed to rely on bezdin. He's supposed to be mevatel his das to their das. That's the kasha which is asked over here. And there's different tirutzim. One of the tirutzim is that the whole din of a zokim mamre is only if he presented his taina and they argued against him. Whereas he presented his reason for disagreeing with them, and they said afal became that they disagree with him and they heard his taina, and nevertheless they disagreed with him. So then he has to be mevatel his das towards them, and then taka, he would taka be potter with everyone else, even if they come back and they say they made a mistake. Shegagaos over here is talking about that he didn't really present his argument. He didn't present why he holds different than them. So in Mela, then he's takanala to do with what they said until he goes ahead and presents his argument and see if they're going to change their mind. And he nevertheless went ahead without presenting his argument and did what they said you should do, even though he thought in his mind that it's not true. So then it's a mistake. That was a mistake to go ahead and do what they said he should do without presenting his argument. And Mela, if he did it, he has to bring his own chatos. Halacha vav. Hayru bezn lahatir dover ha'asur b'zodin. There wasn't a shegig on their part. It was a mezit. And lepel v'asu akol al piyam b'shgaga. Bet the shkol did it based on what they passed in b'shgaga. So bezn p'turim in akarbim teishay mizim. Lepel they were mezit. V'chol echad v'echad min ha'ism al piyam chayev karbim b'fnei atzmei. B'pnei shu shegig. Each person was a shegig. And again, since bezn is not the one that are really taking the responsibility for their shegig, because they were paskin b'mezit, so Mamela, that din doesn't apply, that they should be chayev in this parhel and davashal tzibur. So therefore, every yachid has to bring his own carbon chatos. Now, hoiru bezn bishgoga, bezn paskin bishgoga, bezn warrior shegig. Abalepel v'yadu hakol shetov. The kol seems like it's a hard case over here. The bezn paskin thinking that they were right. And the call knew that they were wrong. And v'she'ein roy lekabel them. You're not supposed to be mekabel from them. And v'afal pikein osu hakol al piyam. The call did al piyam. So based on the fact that they did al piyam, even though they knew that Bezin was wrong. So the din is elu ve'elu p'turim in akarm. They're both p'turim in akarm. Why? Bezin p'turim sherli osu hakol mipnei hirasim shitasim. When is Bezin chayiv? Only if they paskin, and as a result of their psak din, the call thought that they were saying the right psak din, and they did what they did. Masha'en came over here. Everyone knew that they were wrong. So since people knew that they were wrong, so you can't say that they caused people to do things b'shegeg al piyam. Now, what about the rest of the people? Let them be chayiv. They're mizidin shari yodu sheto. V'she'ein royal asis. They're yodu shetov v'she'ein royal asis. So therefore, what they did was an union of amazit. So nachamol, you have a bezin that went ahead and by accident, mistake, they paskin something, and everyone knows they made a mistake. So we say bezin is potter because no one, and the lepel the kol did al piyam anyways. So bezin is potter because no one did really al piyam because they knew they were making a mistake. And on the other end, the kol is potter because the kol is considered mizidim. Now it's very hard to understand because what do you mean the kol? Who's the kol? The kol l'chur is made up of a lot of amaratzim, and we said before that the idea of an amaris is not called the idea. That's one shaila. There's another shaila is that before we said that there's a Talmud Chacham that's royal and he did al piyam based on the fact that he thought you're supposed to listen to them. So then the din is that he has to bring a korban chatos. He has to bring korban chatos. So that's called a mistake. It's not called a mezid. He knows that Bezin made a mistake and he did it, so that's called a mistake because he's assuming that you're supposed to listen to Bezin even though he knows that Bezin made a mistake. So the chur over here also, the call is doing based on what Bezin's paskin, even though Bezin paskin a mistake, but nevertheless they're doing based on what Bezin paskin, so which is a mistake, even if it is a mistake. The first thing is we have to understand why is it a mistake. L'chura, Bezin paskin and the call, most of the call are amaratzim l'chura. So why is it a mistake to listen to the Bezin? For Amaris to listen to the Bezin is l'chura not a mistake, because the idea is not a idea. And also, even if it is a mistake, even if they didn't do right, but why don't they bring a chatas? L'chura, in the case of a chacham doing al piyam, you bring a chatas. You have to learn that since over here, because the whole call knows that Bezin made a mistake, so even though it's comprised with a lot of amaratzim, but lapil, since the whole call, there could be some musik, you have to understand the Haggadah. There could be the whole call knows the Bezin made a mistake. So Mamela, it's an absolute knowledge And it's not again the fact that you're a chacham, not a chacham. It's an absolute knowledge that Bezdin made a mistake. Ad kedikach, that it's an absolute knowledge that Bezdin made a mistake, that it's considered amazing. You have to have that seer exactly.